The detective isn't scary when he first sits down across from you. That's the thing nobody tells you. He's got a notepad, not handcuffs. He sets it on the table carefully, like he's a guest, like he has manners. He asks how you're doing, and you think, this is routine. This is nothing. You answer honestly, because you've done nothing wrong. Then he asks where Elliott was on the 14th of March. Something goes cold in your chest. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. The way you feel when a word you've been saying wrong your whole life suddenly gets corrected in public. The shape of it was always off. You just never noticed until someone said it out loud. You tell him Elliott was with you, because that's what you've been saying for 8 months. Nora is 34. She works in supply chain logistics. She is the kind of person who notices things. Inventory discrepancies, shipping delays, the moment a supplier starts padding numbers. She is precise. She is organized. She trusts data. She trusted Elliott. They met the way a lot of people meet now. A mutual friend's birthday, a loud bar, a conversation that somehow stayed interesting past midnight. Elliott was warm, easy to talk to. He had this way of paying attention that made you feel like the room had gone quiet, like you were the only signal worth receiving. They dated for 7 months before she gave him that alibi. She wasn't even sure it counted as giving it at first. It was a Tuesday night in late March. She remembers because she'd just finished a brutal quarter-end report, and she was on the couch in her good sweatpants, the ones that meant she had survived something. Elliott called. He sounded fine, normal. Maybe a little flat, but Elliott had flat days. She knew that about him by then. He said, "Hey, if anyone asks, I was at your place tonight. My ex is being weird and I just don't want the drama." She said, okay. She didn't ask which ex. She didn't ask what weird meant. She was tired. She loved him. She figured it was the kind of low-level social static that happens when you leave a relationship badly and the other person hasn't quite let go. She'd been there. She understood. She said, okay, and she went back to her couch and she didn't think about it again. Here is what Nora doesn't know yet. The ex's name is Petra. Petra filed a police report on March 14th. She'd been finding things outside her apartment door for 6 weeks by then. A dead plant she'd thrown away, placed back upright outside her door. A photograph she deleted from her own Instagram, printed and slid under the mat. Her spare key, which she had never given Elliott, left on her kitchen counter while she was at work. She had cameras by then. She'd installed them herself after the 3rd incident. And on March 14th, the camera caught a man in a hoodie in the hallway of her building at 11:47 p.m. The camera quality wasn't perfect, but the build was right, the walk was right, and the car in the parking structure 2 floors down, captured by the building's exterior camera, was a grey Honda Civic with a dent above the rear left wheel. Elliott drove a grey Honda Civic. Nora knew about the dent. She'd watched him back into a parking barrier outside a grocery store 4 months earlier and laugh about it. She didn't know about Petra. She didn't know about the plant, or the key, or the photograph, or the 6 weeks of small, careful terrorizing that had been happening in the background of her relationship, like a program running behind a screen. She said okay on a Tuesday night and gave a man cover to walk away clean. And she is sitting across from a detective right now, in her kitchen, with a cup of coffee she has not touched, realizing that she's been a variable in someone else's equation this whole time. The detective asks her if she'd like to see the parking garage footage. She says yes. She already knows what she's going to see. She just needed someone to confirm that she isn't losing her mind, that she gave her trust to someone who had already decided exactly what to use it for. Stay with me. The detective's name is Calloway. He is not unkind. That almost makes it worse. He doesn't treat Nora like a suspect. He treats her like someone who is about to receive information she isn't going to enjoy. And he's pacing it carefully, the way you pace bad news when you've delivered enough of it to know that speed doesn't help anyone. He shows her the footage. It's grainy. Parking garage lighting always is. That particular shade of yellow that makes everything look like a memory that's already fading. But the car is clear enough. The dent is clear enough. And the timestamp reads 11:47 p.m., March 14th. Elliott had told her he was home by 9. She remembers this because she'd texted him goodnight at 9:15, and he'd responded with a photo of his couch and a complaint about a show she'd recommended. She'd laughed at it. She'd screenshot it because she was saving things like that back then. Small, ordinary moments, the texture of being with someone. She does not say any of this to Calloway. She looks at the timestamp. She looks at the car. And she says, very quietly, that she'd like a moment. He gives her one. Here is what you need to understand about Nora and Elliott before this goes any further. She was not naive. That is important. She was not a woman who ignored warning signs out of desperation or low self-worth or any of the tidy explanations people reach for when they're trying to make someone else's story make sense. She was sharp. She had ended 2 relationships before Elliott because something felt off, and she trusted that feeling. With Elliott, nothing felt off. That's the part she will spend a long time sitting with afterward. Not the betrayal itself. She can metabolize betrayal. She has done it before. What she cannot immediately metabolize is the absence of signal. The fact that she was paying attention and there was nothing to catch. Or, and this is the thought that starts forming in Calloway's kitchen, there was something to catch, and she caught it, and she filed it somewhere labeled Elliott's Quirks without ever opening the folder again. Let her open it now. Elliott was private. She'd always known that. He didn't share his phone casually. He kept his laptop tilted away from her when they sat together. Not dramatically, just enough. She'd noticed and decided it was a personality type, not a warning. Some people are private. She respected that. Elliott never talked about his last relationship in any detail. She knew the woman existed. She knew they'd dated for about 2 years. She knew it ended badly, his word, and she hadn't pushed because she didn't need the full archaeology of someone else's heartbreak on the 3rd date. She respected that, too. Elliott sometimes canceled last minute. Not often enough to be a pattern, she'd thought. Once or twice a month, something would come up. Work, a friend in a rough spot, a migraine. She'd been understanding because she believed in being understanding. Because she was, genuinely, an understanding person. She is sitting with the folder now. Private. Guarded. No detail about the ex. Gaps in his schedule that she filled in with charity, because she loved him, and love is, among other things, the willingness to assume the best. He handed her that willingness, held it up to the light, decided it was useful. Calloway comes back into the kitchen. He sets a second cup of coffee in front of her, which she also won't drink. He tells her that Petra had been documenting incidents since late January. 6 weeks of entries in a notes app with timestamps, photographs, and descriptions. The dead plant, the key, the photograph. 3 occasions when she'd heard someone in the hallway outside her apartment at night and looked through the peephole to find no one there. 1 occasion when she'd come home to find a window unlocked that she was certain she'd locked. Calloway tells her that Petra had dated Elliott for 2 years. He tells her that the relationship ended because Petra found messages. He doesn't elaborate on the messages yet, and Nora doesn't ask, because she is doing something she has always been good at. She is building the structure from the available parts, and she doesn't need Calloway to hand her every piece. She already knows the shape of it. She just didn't know she was inside it. If you've ever been with someone who made you feel like the stable one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't ask too many questions, stay with me. Because that feeling wasn't an accident. That was a construction. And the next part of this is where we find out exactly how it was built. Subscribe if you're not already here. This channel is where we slow it down until it makes sense. Right back into it. Calloway tells her about the messages. He doesn't read them aloud. He slides a printed summary across the table, a document that Petra's attorney had already compiled, neat and time-stamped, because Petra had been preparing for exactly this kind of conversation for months. She knew no one was going to take her seriously without receipts. She made receipts. Nora reads the summary. She reads it twice. The messages started 3 weeks after Petra ended the relationship. Not angry messages, not at first. That's the part Nora keeps returning to in the days after this conversation. The opening was soft, reasonable. Elliott asking if they could talk. Elliott saying he understood if she needed space, but he just wanted her to know he was sorry. Elliott saying he missed her. Elliott saying he'd been doing a lot of thinking. Petra responded twice, politely. She said she needed time. She said she appreciated the apology, but she wasn't ready to talk. She said she'd reach out when she was. He did not wait. The messages continued. Not every day, that's also important. Every few days. Sometimes a week would pass and Petra would breathe and think it was over, and then her phone would light up again. A memory, a song, a restaurant they used to go to. Nothing threatening, nothing you could point to cleanly and say, this is the thing. That's how it works. Nora knows this now. The individual messages were almost defensible. It was the pattern that wasn't. And patterns require someone to be paying attention long enough to see them, which is exactly what Elliott was counting on nobody doing. Petra was paying attention. Petra had been paying attention since the beginning. This is where Nora's folder cracks open all the way. She thinks about the night she met Elliott, the mutual friend's birthday, the loud bar, the conversation that wouldn't quit. She thinks about how he'd mentioned, in that early, warm window when everything is confession and curiosity, that his last relationship had ended because she became obsessive. His word, obsessive. He'd said it with something that looked like sadness and something that looked like exhaustion, and she'd read it as the particular tiredness of a person who'd been on the receiving end of too much need. She'd felt compassion. She had felt compassion for him, about a woman who, at that exact moment, was changing her phone number for the second time. Nora sets the summary down on the table. She doesn't cry. Not yet. What she feels isn't grief right now. It's the very specific vertigo of realizing that a story you thought you were a character in was actually a stage set, that the backdrop was painted, that the whole thing was built to make her a useful piece in someone else's arrangement. She asks Calloway, "How long?" He says Petra's documentation covers 6 weeks, but the messaging history goes back 14 months. 14 months. Nora and Elliott had been together for 7. She does the math she doesn't want to do. He was still messaging Petra when he and Nora met at the birthday party. He was still messaging Petra when he told Nora that the relationship was in the rear view. He was messaging Petra on the night of their 3rd date, probably from the car on the way home, because he'd been a little distracted at dinner, and she'd asked if he was okay, and he'd said, "Just tired, long week, work stuff." She'd believed him. She'd reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. She would very much like to have that hand back. Calloway asks her if Elliott ever talked about Petra by name. She says no. He referred to her as his ex, always. Never a name. She'd thought nothing of it. Some people process old relationships by depersonalizing them, pulling the name out of circulation until the wound settles. She'd done something like that herself once. Calloway nods. He writes something down. He asks if Elliott ever asked her to confirm his whereabouts on any other occasion besides March 14th. She starts to say no, and then she stops. Because she is opening the folder all the way now, all the way to the back. And there is something there she had completely forgotten about, something from 5 months ago, something small and reasonable that she filed under Elliott's quirks and never looked at again. There was another night, October 9th. That's the date when she finds it. Not in a file, not in a calendar, in her own memory, which turns out to be more reliable than she'd given it credit for. Because the brain stores things even when you tell it not to bother, even when you decide something isn't worth keeping. It keeps it anyway, in a drawer you didn't know you had, waiting for the moment you finally need it. October 9th. 5 months before the detective. 5 months before the parking garage footage and the printed summary and the folder she cannot close. Elliott had called her on a Wednesday afternoon and asked her, casually, the way you ask someone to grab milk on the way home, if she'd told her friend Greer that he'd been at Nora's place the previous Saturday night. She'd said yes, actually. She'd mentioned it in passing when Greer asked what she'd done that weekend. Elliott had said, "Great, perfect, thanks." She had thought he was asking because he and Greer had run into each other somewhere and wanted to make sure their stories matched up socially, the way people do when they're new to a relationship's extended circle and want to seem consistent. She had thought it was a small, considerate thing. She tells Calloway about October 9th. He writes it down without reacting, which tells her it matters. She asks him directly now. She is done waiting for information to be handed to her in careful portions. She asks him what Elliott was doing on the Saturday in October that he needed her friend to confirm he wasn't there. Calloway looks at her for a moment. He tells her that Petra moved apartments in October, first week of the month. New building, new locks, new neighborhood. She hadn't told anyone outside her immediate family where she was moving. She'd been careful. She'd been so careful. By the 3rd week of October, there was a dead plant outside her new door. He found her. He found her, and then he called Nora on a Wednesday afternoon and asked about milk. Here's what Nora is understanding right now, in real time, in a way she will not be able to understand. She was not incidental to this. She was not a girlfriend who happened to be nearby when something bad was happening in a separate compartment of Elliott's life. She was a resource. Specifically, she was an alibi resource. A woman with a clean reputation, a credible affect, and a demonstrated willingness to trust him. He had identified that willingness early. He had maintained it carefully. He had spent 7 months making her feel like the stable, reasonable, undemanding partner. Because a stable, reasonable, undemanding partner does not ask questions. And a partner who does not ask questions says okay on a Tuesday night without needing to know why. She had been selected for her qualities. That is perhaps the most disorienting thing she will ever have to sit with. Calloway asks if Elliott ever said anything negative about Petra in the course of the relationship. Complaints, characterizations, the kind of thing a person says to establish narrative. Nora almost laughs. She doesn't, but it moves through her. Because yes, of course. Not often, that's the thing. It was never often enough to register as a campaign. But there were moments. A comment here about how Petra had struggled with anxiety that sometimes made her reactive. A mention there that the breakup had brought out a side of her he hadn't seen before. Once, early on, a quiet observation that some people just couldn't let things go. Said not with malice, but with the gentle weariness of a man who had tried his best and been met with difficulty. She had believed him. She had believed him and filed the information under context, and then used that context without realizing it every time she chose not to investigate further. Because somewhere in the foundation of her trust in Elliott was a story he'd built about a woman who couldn't be trusted to tell her own story accurately. He had discredited his witness before his witness had said a word. What does it feel like when you realize the version of events you've been holding wasn't yours to begin with? Not yours, his. Handed to you so carefully you thought you'd formed it yourself. That's the question I want you to sit with. Because this is the part of the story where Nora stops being someone things happen to and starts being someone who is going to decide what happens next. And Elliott is about to find out what happens when the resource stops being quiet. Stay here. She calls Elliott from the driveway. Calloway had asked her not to contact him yet. There's a process, he'd said, a way these things need to move. But she is in her car and her hands are on the wheel and she needs to hear his voice. Not because she wants comfort, because she wants data. Because she has spent 7 months being the woman who didn't ask questions, and she is done with that particular role. And she wants to hear what he sounds like when she finally does. He picks up on the second ring. He sounds exactly the same. Warm, easy, a little surprised to hear from her in the middle of a workday, but in a good way, the way you sound when something you like shows up unexpectedly. He asks how she is. She says she's been better. He asks what's wrong. And she says, very calmly, that a detective came to see her this morning, that his name is Calloway, that he had some questions about March 14th and a parking garage on Clement Street and a gray Honda Civic with a dent above the rear left wheel. The silence that follows is not long, maybe 3 seconds. But she has been in enough negotiations, enough difficult conversations with suppliers who were hoping she wouldn't notice the numbers were off, to know the difference between a silence that is surprised and a silence that is calculating. This one is calculating. He had 3 seconds, and he used them to build a response. He says it wasn't what it looked like. She almost asks what it looked like, just to hear him define it. She doesn't. She waits. He says Petra had been reaching out to him, that she'd been struggling since the breakup, and he'd been trying to help from a distance, be a resource without reopening things. And sometimes that meant checking in, and he knew it looked bad, but his intentions were his intentions. She lets him finish. She is very good at letting people finish. It is one of her qualities. When he's done, she asks him one question. She asks him how Petra found her own spare key on her kitchen counter when she'd never given it to anyone. Another silence. Shorter this time because he wasn't expecting that specific detail, and there is no prepared architecture for it. He says he doesn't know what she's talking about. She says she thinks he does. She drives home. She does not cry on the drive home, which surprises her a little. What she feels instead is something closer to the sensation after a long illness. That specific clarity that arrives when a fever finally breaks and the world snaps back into focus, and you realize how distorted everything looked when you were inside it. It doesn't feel good exactly, but it feels true. And true, right now, is what she has been missing. She thinks about Petra installing cameras, Petra keeping a notes app with timestamps, Petra filing a police report and then another one, and then sitting across from Calloway herself, probably in a kitchen not unlike Nora's, handing over a compiled document that nobody asked her to compile, but she compiled anyway, because she knew that undocumented things disappear, and she refused to let this one disappear. Nora thinks about what it costs to do that alone. To watch something happen to you, and know that the version of you that reports it will be met with the version of you that he built in advance. The anxious one, the reactive one, the one who couldn't let things go. She thinks about sitting across from Elliott at that third date, reaching across the table, covering his hand with hers while he texted Petra from the car 40 minutes later. She thinks about saying okay on a Tuesday night. She calls Calloway from her driveway. She tells him she has something else. Because she is opening the drawer all the way now. Not just October, not just March. She's thinking about the last 7 months, with the new information laid underneath every memory, like a transparency. And things are appearing that she walked past without stopping. The tilted laptop, the private phone, the canceled evenings, the way he'd once asked, offhandedly, whether she'd mentioned him to her building's front desk, framed as a question about whether they recognized him when he came by, warm and casual. But what he was actually asking was whether she had a habit of reporting his presence to people who wrote things down. She had said no, she hadn't. He had smiled and changed the subject. She tells Calloway all of it. Every piece she filed under quirks. Every small, reasonable thing that was neither small nor reasonable once you removed the assumption of good faith and looked at the structure underneath. Calloway listens. He writes. He thanks her. Before she gets out of the car, she asks him one more thing. She asks if Petra is okay. He pauses in the way that people who deliver information professionally pause when the answer is complicated. He says Petra is safe. He says she has been cooperating fully. He says she has been waiting a long time for someone else to see what she saw. Nora says she's sorry it took this long. She means it for Petra. She also means it for herself. This is the part of the story where the architecture collapses. Not with a dramatic scene, not with a confrontation, with a woman in a driveway making a phone call and telling the truth about every moment she was handed a story and chose to believe it. Elliott counted on her being reasonable. He counted on her being understanding. He counted on her asking no questions. He did not count on the moment reasonable people run out of patience for being useful to someone who was never worth their trust. That moment is here. Elliott is arrested on a Thursday morning. Nora finds out from Calloway, who calls her as a courtesy. She is a witness now, a formal one, and there is a process she will need to participate in, a statement to sign, a timeline to verify. She listens to all of it standing at her kitchen window, watching the neighbor's dog drag a stick across the lawn with enormous satisfaction. She thinks, that dog has no idea. She thinks, that dog is living its best life and it has no idea. She is not sure what she is living yet, but she is living it honestly, and that counts for something. Petra and Nora never meet in person. They exchange 2 messages through Calloway's office, brief, careful, the kind of communication that happens between people who share something significant and have no shared language for it yet. Petra's message to Nora is 4 sentences. She thanks her for corroborating the timeline. She says she knows Nora didn't know. She says it matters that Nora told the truth when she found out. Nora reads it 4 times. She writes back 3 drafts and sends the 4th, which is the shortest, that she is sorry, that she believes Petra, that she wishes she had asked more questions sooner. She does not say, I should have known, because she has thought carefully about that and decided it is not quite accurate, and she is done accepting frameworks that don't fit. She did not know. That is the truth. She was given a carefully constructed not knowing, and she moved through it in good faith. What she should have done, what she will do differently, permanently, going forward, is treat privacy as a data point. Notice the folder. Open it sooner. Understand that a person who keeps their life in careful separate compartments is showing you something, even when they think they're hiding it. She should have asked whose story she was agreeing to carry. There's a version of this story where Nora spends a long time feeling like a fool. She has that version available to her. She visits it occasionally, the way you visit a place you used to live. She knows where everything is, she knows how it feels, she doesn't stay. Because here's the thing she keeps coming back to. Elliott was sophisticated. He was patient. He chose carefully, built slowly, maintained consistently. He ran a long operation on multiple people simultaneously, and he was good at it. The fact that he was good at it is not a referendum on the people he ran it on. A person who has spent years practicing a specific deception will be better at it than someone encountering it for the first time. Nora was encountering it for the first time. Petra had encountered it before and tried to tell the story and been preemptively discredited by the man whose story she was trying to tell. Both of those things can be true. Neither woman was naive. Both were working with the information they had. This is the part that matters. Nora quits saving screenshots. Not immediately. It takes her a few months to fully lose the habit. But eventually she stops cataloging small, ordinary moments, stops trying to build an archive of being with someone, because she understands now that an archive is not proof of a thing. It is just evidence that you are present. Presence without clarity is not enough. She starts asking questions earlier, small ones, not interrogations. She is not interested in becoming someone who processes every new person through suspicion. But she asks. She follows the feeling when it shows up. She opens the folder instead of labeling it and setting it down. She and Greer have dinner 6 weeks after the arrest. Greer, who confirmed the October alibi to someone she trusted without knowing what she was confirming. They sit with that together. Two women who are good to a man who used goodness as a mechanism. And they talk for 3 hours and order too much food, and at the end, Greer says, "I think the lesson is we need worse manners." Nora laughs for the first time in months. Not worse manners, just fewer free passes. The charges against Elliott are filed in April. Petra's documentation, the notes app, the timestamps, the photographs, 14 months of evidence she kept because she refused to let it disappear, is central to the case. A single notes app. Started the night she found the dead plant outside her first apartment door, when something told her to write it down, even though she hoped she'd never need it. She needed it, and it held. That is the whole lesson. That is every lesson. When something in you says write it down, write it down. Not because you're paranoid, not because you're building a case, because your perception has value. And the world will not always agree with you immediately. And the gap between this is happening and this is documented is where people like Elliott have always lived. Close the gap. People always show you who they are. Elliott showed Nora who he was on the night he called her and asked her to confirm a story she didn't know was false. She filed it under low-level drama and moved on. She knows now that low-level drama is sometimes just what manipulation looks like when it's working correctly. She's not angry at herself for not knowing then, but she will not forget now. And neither will you. One last thing before I let you go. If you are in the middle of a story you can't quite read, if something keeps not adding up and the explanation you're being handed fits a little too neatly, trust that feeling. You don't have to blow anything up. You don't have to confront anyone. You just have to stop filling in the gaps with charity and start asking what's actually there. You already knew. You just needed permission to trust it. Comment below, what was the moment for you? The thing that finally made the shape of it clear. I read everything. I want to hear it. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story, the one who's been calling it drama, the one who's been saying they're probably overreacting, send it to them, right now. That's what this channel is for. I'm Dee. See you in the next one. And this is Fur by Firelight.